Okay, imagine this. A summer street, 1518. But instead of like happy market sounds, you just hear this relentless pounding.
Rhythmic, frantic.
Yeah, frantic is the word. Hundreds of people, moving, dancing almost, but totally uncontrollably. Bodies jerking, faces look strained, some are just collapsing.
Not a performance, not a party. Something else entirely.
Exactly. This was real. Strasbourg, 1518. Welcome to the deep dive.
Right.
We grab a whole stack of sources, articles, historical accounts, you name it, and we dive right in, pulling out the most interesting bits for you.
And today, we're tackling one of history's absolute strangest events, the Dancing Plague of 1518.
It's just baffling.
It really is. And our mission here is to unpack all that material, try to figure out what exactly was going on that summer. What did people think was happening back then?
And what do we think now? Like with modern science and psychology.
Exactly. What are the theories? And maybe most importantly, what does this whole bizarre episode tell us, about people, societies, how we react when things get weird and stressful?
Okay, so let's jump back. July 1518, Strasbourg. It apparently starts with just one person.
One woman, Frau Trophäa, the sources call her. She just steps out onto the street outside her house and, she starts dancing.
Just like that. No music.
No music mentioned in the early accounts. No obvious trigger. She just began to dance. And apparently she didn't stop for days.
Days. Okay, that's weird enough on its own. But it didn't stay just her, did it?
No, that's where it gets really wild. Within about a week, maybe less, she wasn't alone. Other people started joining in.
How many?
Well, it started with a few dozen, maybe 3 dozen or so. But by August, some accounts claim the number swelled to around 400 people. 400 people dancing uncontrollably in the streets.
They called them choreomaniacs, right?
That's the term used, yeah. And this wasn't like a gentle waltz. The descriptions are pretty harrowing. Fervent, uncontrolled spasms, almost violent movement.
Like convulsions?
Yeah, convulsions, thrashing arms, people drenched in sweat, eyes looking vacant or, just filled with terror. Some were apparently crying out for help, but they just couldn't stop moving.
God, the physical toll, I can't even imagine.
It must have been horrific. Sources talk about feet becoming swollen, bloody messes from the constant pounding, people collapsing from pure exhaustion, hunger, thirst.
And people actually died from this.
Well, later sources make some pretty startling claims. Figures like up to 15 deaths per day at the peak of the outbreak, usually attributed to exhaustion, stroke, or heart attack.
15 people a day dying from dancing. That seems almost unbelievable.
It does. And, we should be a bit cautious with those specific numbers. Historians point out that the actual city records from 1518, while they definitely document this weird plague, they aren't crystal clear on the exact number of fatalities directly caused by the dancing.
Okay, so maybe not 15 a day, but still clearly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. Whatever the exact number, the physical consequences were severe. People were dancing themselves literally to the point of collapse.
So the city council, the authorities, they see hundreds of people doing this. What on earth do they do?
Well, their first reaction, looking back now, seems incredibly misguided.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Based on the medical thinking of the time, humors, balancing the body, they apparently decided it was caused by hot blood.
Hot blood. Okay.
And the prescription for hot blood, well, you needed to sweat it out. So they decided that the dancers needed more dancing.
Wait, what? Their solution was more dancing?
Exactly. They thought, okay, they need to dance this fever out of their systems. So they actually leaned into it.
Ah.
They cleared out guild halls. They built wooden stages right in the market squares. They hired musicians to play tunes.
They added music.
They did. Ironically, adding music to this compulsion that apparently started without any. They even hired strong people, like helpers, to hold the dancers up, keep them moving, stop them from collapsing.
Right.
The idea was literally to let them dance themselves free.
That sounds completely backwards, like pouring gasoline on a fire.
And that's pretty much what happened. It backfired. Badly. Having these public stages and music, it just seemed to encourage more people to join in, or maybe intensified it for those already dancing.
Okay, so they must have realized this wasn't working.
Eventually, yes. Seeing it get worse, they did a complete U-turn. They banned all public dancing, no music allowed anywhere, even cracked down on gambling, maybe thinking it was all part of general sinfulness.
Ah, so the sin angle. This is where St. Vitus comes in.
Precisely. The thinking shifted. The dominant belief became, this isn't hot blood, this is divine punishment. Specifically from St. Vitus.
Why him?
St. Vitus was the saint people prayed to for protection against neurological disorders, things like epilepsy, chorea. And also, crucially, he was believed to punish sinners by making them dance uncontrollably.
Right. So they figured they'd angered the saint.
That was the theory. So the new strategy wasn't medical, it was religious. Appease the saint, stop the plague.
How did they try to do that?
They organized a kind of forced pilgrimage. The dancers, or at least groups of them, were taken to a shrine dedicated to St. Vitus, located in the hills outside Strasbourg.
And what happened at the shrine?
It involved a specific ritual. The dancers wear special red shoes.
Red shoes?
Yeah, consecrated red shoes, sprinkled with holy water, marked with painted crosses. They had to hold small crosses, too. And priests performed rites using incense, Latin prayers, basically trying to exorcise the affliction and beg St. Vitus for forgiveness.
And did it work?
Well, according to the accounts, yes. Word started to spread that the ritual was effective and that people were being cured at the shrine. And around the same time, maybe early September, the outbreak did start to subside.
So the compulsion just faded.
For most people, yeah. The sources say the last remaining dancers were taken up to a mountaintop shrine for sort of a final round of prayers for absolution. And then finally, the dancing plague of 1518 ended.
It's just such a bizarre story. Had anything like this ever happened before? Was Strasbourg unique?
Not entirely unique, no. The historical records we have do mention other similar outbreaks of what they called dancing mania or dancing plagues back in the medieval era, mostly in mainland Europe.
Really? Where else?
There was a famous case back in the 11th century in Kolbik in Saxony. That one was also seen as divine punishment for people apparently dancing disrespectfully near a church.
Huh.
And later, in Italy, particularly Apulia, there was this thing called tarantism. People believed it was caused by tarantula bites, and the cure was this wild, almost convulsive dancing called the tarantella, often to specific music.
So mass compulsive dancing wasn't totally unheard of.
Right. But the Strasbourg event in 1518 seems to have been particularly large-scale and potentially deadly compared to some others.
And back then, besides angry saints or hot blood, what else did they think might be causing it?
Well, other ideas floating around at the time included things like demonic possession, maybe even bad astrological alignments. They were really just trying to make sense of something terrifying and inexplicable using the belief systems they had.
Okay, fast forward a few centuries. We've got modern medicine, psychology. What do researchers looking back at this now think was really going on?
There are basically two main theories that get discussed most often in the research we looked at.
Okay, what's theory number one?
Food poisoning. Specifically, a type called ergotism.
Ergot. That's a fungus that grows on rye bread.
Exactly. It grows on rye and other grains, and rye was a major staple food used for bread, especially for poorer communities back then. This ergot fungus produces chemicals, ergot alkaloids, including ergotamine.
And that stuff is psychoactive.
Very much so. It's actually chemically related to LSD. Ergot poisoning, or St. Anthony's fire as it was sometimes called, can cause horrible symptoms. Gangrene, muscle spasms, convulsions, hallucinations, delirium.
Okay, spasms, convulsions, weird behavior. That sounds like it could fit some of the descriptions of the dancers?
It does seem plausible at first glance, doesn't it? And ergotism has been suggested as a possible explanation for other strange historical events, maybe even the Salem witch trials.
I sense a butt coming.
Well, yeah. Historians like John Waller, who's written extensively on this, raise some pretty strong counterarguments. First, could someone poisoned severely enough by ergot really dance with that kind of energy for days on end? Ergotism is usually debilitating pretty quickly.
Good point. They'd likely collapse much sooner.
Or show other symptoms, like the gangrene, which aren't really mentioned in the dancing plague accounts. Also, ergotism usually affects people differently. Some might get convulsions, others gangrene, others hallucinations. It wasn't described as everyone just dancing. And there's the pattern. These dancing plagues seem to pop up mainly along the Rhine and Moselle river valleys over several centuries. Waller argues it's unlikely that ergot poisoning would consistently manifest only as dancing, and only in this specific geographic pattern across different times and harvests.
Right, you'd expect it to be more widespread or random if it was just contaminated grain.
Potentially, yeah. So, while ergotism is a possibility, it doesn't seem to tick all the boxes perfectly for many researchers.
Okay, so if it's probably not ergotism, what's the other main theory?
This is the one that John Waller and quite a few others lean towards. Stress-induced mass hysteria. Or, the more modern term might be mass psychogenic illness.
Mass hysteria, so like a psychological thing spreading through the crowd.
Essentially, yes. It's a phenomenon where a group of people, often under intense stress, start experiencing similar physical symptoms or exhibiting unusual behaviors, but there's no underlying infectious disease or toxin causing it. It spreads through social contagion, like a psychological ripple effect.
And you mentioned stress. Was Strasbourg in 1518 a particularly stressful place to be?
Oh, incredibly so. The sources paint a picture of Strasbourg and that whole region suffering through what they call ruthless years. We're talking severe famine, widespread diseases like syphilis and leprosy, crushing poverty, and constant political instability and fear.
Wow, so people were living on the edge.
Absolutely. Immense, prolonged psychological distress was just the background reality for many. Just imagine the level of anxiety, grief, and hopelessness.
That sounds like, well, fertile ground for something like mass hysteria.
Exactly. You combine that extreme chronic stress with the deeply ingrained superstitious beliefs of the time, especially the fear of divine wrath and figures like Saint Vitus who could supposedly make you dance.
And you've got a perfect storm.
Pretty much. A population already anxious and primed by their beliefs sees one person start this bizarre behavior, and the fear and suggestion spread, triggering the same response in others. It becomes a collective stress-induced phenomenon.
And didn't you say there were other dancing plagues in that same general area?
Yeah, Waller notes about 7 other similar, those smaller, outbreaks occurred in that Rhine-Moselle region during the medieval period. This suggests there might have been something about the culture or the recurring hardships in that specific area that made people particularly vulnerable to this kind of psychogenic expression.
And the medical term chorea comes from this.
It does, partly. Chorea comes from the Greek chorea, meaning to dance. Medieval doctors observed these epidemics. St. Vitus's dance, St. John's dance were common names, and the term stuck for medical conditions involving involuntary movements, though obviously the supernatural explanation isn't the medical one today.
So the mass hysteria theory basically says the extreme stress and shared beliefs caused the collective psychological breakdown that manifested physically as uncontrollable dancing.
That's the leading idea, yeah. It connects the historical context, the suffering, the superstition, directly to the bizarre physical symptoms. Now, history rarely gives us absolute certainty, right? We can't run tests on people from 1518.
Sure.
But based on the available evidence, mass psychogenic illness triggered by overwhelming stress seems to provide a compelling explanation for many researchers studying this very strange event. Maybe it was a combination of factors, but stress seems key.
Stepping back a bit then, what does something as extreme as the dancing plague tell us more broadly about, people and societies?
I think it's a really stark reminder of just how powerful the connection between the mind and body is, especially under extreme duress.
How stress isn't just in your head.
Not at all. It shows how collective anxiety and fear can manifest in very real, very physical ways. It's also a dramatic example of social contagion, how behaviors, emotions, even physical symptoms can spread through a group almost like a virus, especially when people are vulnerable.
And how what we believe, like the power of St. Vitus, can actually shape our physical reality, or at least our experience of it.
Absolutely. The shared belief system provided the framework, the language for what was happening. Fear of the saint likely fueled the outbreak, and belief in the ritual perhaps helped end it. It fits into that larger pattern of mass psychogenic events we see throughout history.
You mentioned others, like the Tanganyika laughter epidemic.
Yeah, or maybe even aspects of the Salem witch trials. These events, while different, often share underlying themes of community stress, suggestibility, and the spread of unusual symptoms or behaviors without a clear organic cause. Though the dancing plague seems particularly extreme in its physical demands.
Do you think something like this specific kind of bizarre compulsive mass behavior could happen today?
Well, maybe not exactly dancing in the streets driven by fear of a saint. Our stresses and our belief systems are different now, aren't they?
Right.
But the underlying mechanisms, extreme stress, social networks spreading anxiety or behaviors rapidly, the mind's influence over the body, those haven't gone away. Mass psychogenic illness still happens, maybe manifesting in different ways, fainting spells in schools, localized symptom clusters, so perhaps not dancing, but other collective stress responses. It's possible.
It's definitely an event that sticks with you. I know it's popped up in pop culture.
Oh, for sure. It captures the imagination. There's that short film by Jonathan Glazer, Strasbourg 1518, Florence plus a Machine, has that song Choreomania. There are graphic novels, historical fiction books.
It's just inherently fascinating and unsettling.
Totally. It taps into that weirdness of human behavior, the idea that our own minds, collectively, could drive us to do something so strange, so uncontrollable, even self-destructive.
Okay, so let's recap. We've walked through the bizarre story of the dancing plague of 1518. Started with Frau Trophäa, spread to hundreds.
Uncontrollable, exhausting, potentially fatal dancing.
We looked at the authorities' initial reaction, more dancing, which didn't work.
Nope. Then the shift to blaming St. Vitus and the religious rituals that seemed to coincide with the end of it all.
And we've explored the main modern theories, maybe ergot poisoning from bad rye bread.
But perhaps more likely, mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria, fueled by the incredible stress, famine, disease, and superstitious fears of that time and place.
It really highlights this incredible intersection of history, psychology, and just the sheer strangeness the human experience can sometimes involve.
It's a deep dive that shows a community pushed to its absolute limit, grappling with something utterly beyond its comprehension, resulting in this tragic, physical manifestation of collective distress.
So thinking about that potent mix, intense stress, shared beliefs, social contagion, here's something to mull over. In our world today, hyper-connected, saturated with information, facing our own complex anxieties, could we see similar collective phenomena emerge? Maybe not dancing, but other bizarre, stress-driven behaviors spreading through social networks. The human mind, it seems, still holds some deep, unsettling mysteries.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, as you think about this incredible story from 1518, what part grabs you the most? Is it the sheer physical endurance, the authorities' reaction, or what it might reveal about our own psychology under pressure? It's definitely a historical puzzle worth considering.